Hey guys, so we're going to talk about when subdivision goes wrong, and we'll start with a question I was asked. Someone was curious if there's certain types of geometry out there that you can't avoid using triangles or n-gons. So we're going to start with that one. And triangle and an n-gon, like so, right? If you subdivide these one time, you'll realize they create n-poles and e-poles. And I've talked about this on the channel before, right? It's not unknown knowledge, I'd say, at this point. But an n-pole, single vertex with 3 edges. E-pole, 5 edges or more coming out of a single vertex, right? And so these are going to be in your meshes regardless, right? If you were to create, like, say, a plane, do a little grid like so, and you extruded like that, right? N pole, E pole. Okay. So the main thing here, though, is that when you're working on curved surfaces, you're trying to avoid doing those kinds of geometries on these surfaces here. Like if you just start collapsing things randomly, right? You start creating N poles and E poles all over the place, perhaps, right? The problem with this, the first time you subdivide it, okay, and then you subdivide it again, you see you start getting the N pole, E pole. Problem is when you start sculpting on this or displacing it, things like that, or deforming it because it needs animation, those can be very noticeable sometimes because they're creating like little edge flows and things like that. So you're trying to avoid using those on curved surfaces, perhaps, like that. That doesn't mean you can't use them, though. If you were, for example, to, let's just say we did a knife cut through here, and inset it, hold it, Control, hit B, do something like that. If we subdivide something like this, and let's say it had some holding edges as well. Let's knock that out real quick. All right. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this mesh entirely. Well, it's going to create an E-pole. But this is what's wrong, the edge flow, obviously. Maybe a little bit of a bad example. Let's try add an additional geo and see if it helps it a bit. Okay. Yeah, so it's still a little bit tight in there. Okay, let's try this then. Just one cutout that way. So we still have an n-gon, right? But it has an e-pole here, right? So can you use that? Yeah, you could. I mean, technically. It's just kind of out there in the middle of La La Land a little bit. But, you know, if you were to do this more correctly, and we joined out to there, so we had from that n-gon basically into 2 quads, we have an e-pole way out there. So you need to be able to control these and know where to place them and how to shift them around and whatnot. Because you can't, well, not that you can't, but you usually don't want e-poles out in the middle of nowhere. So if you could turn everything into quads, it'd be a better option for you. It's not always going to be possible, though, so just be careful of your placement of e-poles and n-poles. And if you ever have to do a collapse to a triangle, or you have to use an e-pole for like a saddle or something, you could do that. I think one of the biggest issues you guys are going to face, though, is working with curves in general. It's not even necessarily having perfect topo right away. So let me just talk about this real quick. If I do like an inset here, inset, right? A lot of you run into cylinders very quick. You find out that they're very hard to deal with sometimes. And the reason being is that if we were to work with this edge here and we try to tighten up that corners by GG twice, sliding it over, we get like a flat section of the cylinder. So you realize very quickly you just simply don't want to touch these edges very much, otherwise you end up flattening things out, right? So, but this one, you can move up and down all day long. It doesn't really matter. It's always going to be okay for the most part. And the reason is because the plane surface is just flat. More or less, you're going up and down, right? That's all that one's doing. So when you're starting to model more complex things, what you run into an issue with is that, let's go back to that example mesh I had earlier. You have something like this going on. We can use the triangle because we know it's going to break down into an n-pole, right? But you start doing things like this, right? Maybe you have an edge way out here and bring that way down. Okay. And so it doesn't even look like a bad subdivision mesh right now. It's technically, it's okay. It's maybe usable. It's creating the end pole, which would more than likely have to create anyways. So the triangle actually works out in this situation. But one of the main issues that you'll run into is a lot of times you have very strong kind of skews to your edges, if you would. So if I skew it really heavily, we might do something like that. Okay. But what if we had opposing geometry? And it was like a little kind of pill shape or something in this area. Or you're trying to create a pill shape anyways, or maybe just a rectangular cut. Who knows? Maybe you need the sharp edges. And what if it was all just rotated so that's facing more towards the rear, like that, in this area? This is where you guys get into the most trouble. Whenever you have diagonals and you're trying to oppose geometry, this can happen quite rapidly. So you can think of like a screw thread. Another great practice project you can work on is trying to finish off screw threads. They can be very challenging because you have to work with diagonals across cylindrical shapes. But when we have these curves like this, and they're curved in all three directions like that, right? Like there's one there, there's one there, there's now a curve here as well. This doesn't work out as well. So we have to fix the topology before we even consider doing something like this to put it into position, right? Sometimes the scale matters, but also the resolution of the mesh can also come into play, like what resolutions you want to use. It's easier to work with lower resolutions, but if you need sharp corners, just like a cylinder, you're going to have to tighten up the resolution a lot of times. That means you're going to have to work harder for that end result, possibly. And also, the geometry just doesn't agree with us right now. Like we need these geometries to do something more like running through here and going, like if we're going to do an array, we're going to need that multiple times over. That's where you're going to run into most of your trouble. You're not planning these things out necessarily the correct way when you're looking at your geo. I think that's really when subdivision fails the most, is user error in that case. But so how do we even fix something like that? Well, first, modeling more appropriately from the start would definitely be a better bet. It's like, yes, we have great looking geo right here, but we can go through and we can do some knife cuts in a more appropriate manner, perhaps, and start to shift things around. Could be doable. Like maybe we don't run that one to that edge over there. We do something more like that, perhaps, right? Possibility, yes. Another thing is using nicer quads could be also very useful. You can see we're making a bunch of rectangles right now. That's not necessarily a good thing. So let me go ahead and just break it into kind of more simplistic quads for a second. I just want to explain something here. We can use subdivision, keep corners perhaps, apply it. We can use our sculpt tools. The relax slide tool is excellent. You want to do maybe lock your mesh boundaries, but if you're just getting started, it's probably not even needed necessarily just yet. You can shift things around and try to preserve the volume at the same time. So if you can do this, this is excellent because it's going to try to preserve that volume. The lower resolution mesh is going to lose it faster. More dense mesh will work out a little bit better, but you're going to have to go in and start fluctuating things around quite heavily, actually. So, as you're working these things out, this is just one way you could work with it. Perhaps you can see we're pushing everything to the front here. It's becoming really dense there. It's getting loose back here. A little bit squirrely. Plus I'm losing my edges and all that other fun stuff. So modeling it is actually probably your better bet, but it's really hard to get that kind of work done in Blender because it just doesn't have the tools available for you to really do it. Mesh Relax is only going to get you so far. Sometimes having things like the edge flow or set edge flow add-on can also be useful. In our case, just trying to like rotate these things around would be great, but Blender doesn't have that tool available. Now, I know for a fact that if you have the Machine Tools Deus Ex version, you can use edge rotation like so. You can actually use this one to your benefit as well. But it's only going to get you so far as well. You still have to make some hard edits perhaps, right? But you have to prep this area in this case and start making this happen like this, basically. Like you have to really think about what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and start lining up your geos in that fashion. So yeah, a little tricky. You can use your sculpt tools, use the grab tool. You could possibly just use a grab tool even and just kind of shift things around a little bit. Just to maintain that form, basically, is all you're trying to do is maintain the form for the most part. And as you go through that process, then eventually you'll find that you can get it to line up, and eventually maybe you array it. In our case, that array is going to go the wrong way. Let's apply rotation and array. Yeah, more like that. So you would have to have like a nice little edge for each section here. Let me relax that out a little. But basically you're doing a regular Boolean at this point. Like we would maybe apply a level 1 subdivision. We have plenty of geo to work with now. If we get these just placed in the right position, apply that. Eventually we can do our Boolean cut into this area. We just don't want to cross those edges, which I've done a little bit on the back here perhaps. But we got one in this corner, one in this corner for the most part, one in one, one in one, one in one, one in one, one in one. Right? So now we can delete that shape. And this will become much easier to work with like this, as opposed to what we had. And we can even do an array faster than we would do a single Boolean when we prep it accordingly, right? So because these are all kind of uniquely placed into the surface, you can't just get away with like copying mesh and duplicating it, positioning it over necessarily. And so this is definitely going to be one of those times when subdivision fails the most for people, I think. I just wanted to talk about it. I think it's extremely important for some of you to understand this. And when we see like n-gons in certain areas, we might not be the end of the world. You know, we can definitely, some cases you can see like, you might have to like whip the edge around a little bit. Like that might be a thing, but for the most part, we're not struggling here anymore with patching shape with shape, basically. Join that, dissolve that, dissolve that. You see we got an n-gon. If we want to go back through though and start whipping these together like that, that's a possibility. I don't think those are going to subdivide very well doing that because they go to a crazy e-pole. Can merge some things out. Yeah, like this one going way over here is going to be a little squirrely, but we'll see what happens here, I guess. It's not going to be perfect by the end of this video, but you can keep working this. You'll have a much better success rate, I think. Also, you can see like you might have to add loop cuts too. That's a possibility. That's where that set flow add-on comes into play. It just makes life a little bit easier. You can set flow on things if needed. I'll subdivide it one time, shade it smooth, see what happens. Okay, it's very soft. Let's go ahead and go in here. We should be able to loop select these. Oh, that one we cannot. I got rid of the edge there somehow. Set flow. We can balance that back out a little bit maybe. Set flow there too. Doing that. Okay, so now we should be able to loop cut, or loop select, sorry. And we're going to use select loops, boundary loops. There, bevel it. Mouse wheel up once, set it to 1, so we get a Korean bevel, right? And then subdivide it. Just like that. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Like that e-pole I was saying was going to cause a problem. The solution to that one usually is we can select all the way through and add an extra edge in here. This tends to work out fairly well usually, but right now it's going to kind of slide the ways I don't want it to, so it'll flatten out that area just a little bit, but we can definitely use the relax tool, or we could use the smooth tool and set it to surface smooth, right? You don't want to go over the sharp edges, but you could probably try to surface smooth some of these a little bit in these areas. Some of those e-poles aren't going to hurt you. So when, the next time when you do, like some of them obviously are in definitely the wrong positions, I would say. I feel like I got doubles there. All right. Well, I'm just going to split that one and then hit it with the smooth tool real quick. This also tries to preserve volume, but it doesn't do a perfect job. Just keep that in mind. The next time you hit it with a subdivision, level 1, apply it. Guess what you have? You have geo looking like this, right? So if you're failing at subdivision, it's because you just have to get used to this idea that the geometry with curves is going to be some of your most challenging, but diagonals, second best, most challenging thing, I guess. And then just trying to maintain form the whole way through this process is going to be definitely something up there that's going to give you a little bit of issues along the way. You can see we lost a bit of that form in there. I think if I just reduce these two edges, we'll be okay. I think that one will be fine like that. Won't be quite as flat, perhaps. If not, it'll be easier to adjust. And yeah, so we can always go back to the relax tool. And if we want, we can select these areas like this. Let's just Shift G, select coplanar. Control number pad plus till we select more, up past the edge a little bit. We can hit H, hide it, go to sculpt mode, and now we can use the slide relax tool. Hold Shift, and we can just click and drag around in here a little bit and kind of relax it all out. You might want to maintain the border at this point, mesh boundary. All right. Yeah, so you'll see it's trying to just basically even it out for the most part. Might create some distortion in the mesh. Yes, it's true. But the most part, we'll have to figure out how we can get this to look nicer. There's might be a number of different ways you do this. Like I like to Alt S things out a little bit, Control V and smooth vertices usually. And then you can adjust the strength a little bit. A lot of times that works, but it doesn't always. So you just gotta be careful with it. So it's a tricky one to use, but if you want to check with the zebra stripes, do that. You'll find that surface smooth actually works pretty well to straighten things up. You probably want to do like 1 or 2 clicks to get it going. And then if you have to do things manually still, you have to do things manually still. But like you can go in, grab a vertex in the area that's affected, and maybe Alt S it in and out to tweak the perfection of it, I guess. If your mesh isn't super reflective, you don't have to do all that. It doesn't really matter. But if it is like glossy like this, that's when that kind of stuff matters the most. And it's going to give you a run for your money to try to do it all kind of manually like that. A lot of guys, what they do is they'll build like a base mesh that's completely smooth first, and then they don't bother with the booleans like that. They'll like shrink wrap it to it, or they might do like custom normals or something later on. Who knows? But there's all kinds of different fun ways of working it out. But we can still get a fairly decent result out of this. We just definitely are going to have to spend more time on it. Hey, and you can always use the sculpt tools too. Like if you think it's easier to just go in here and just start sculpting this area out a little with like low strength and just seeing what you can get going, then do it. And then smooth it down if needed, you know? Use a regular smooth tool, set it to Laplacian, really low strength, and you can also flatten the surfaces out a little bit like this. So you could think of this as like, it's like acting like a sander is what it's doing basically. At the end of the day, though, your topology reigns supreme. An e-pull out in the middle of nowhere could be the result, or what's causing that result, anyways. So just keep that in mind. Definitely could have did this better, to a higher quality for sure. But it's it's mostly doable, right? You can see that smooth tool works out pretty well usually if you work it accordingly. You got to use it like a sander, like up and down, left and right, across the surfaces, and very low strength usually. And don't hit the edges. don't hit the edges. That's the big one. All right. It's going to just start getting it going, basically. So those are some little finesse ways of dealing with it. Personally, I don't like the geo. I think this is one of our biggest issues right now. Is this geo just isn't working for me in this top section here. It's too rounded. I'd rather have like a sharper edge going through here and cram into the distortions into the edge itself a little bit. But that would require probably use like loop tools and relax maybe, and set the iterative count to something higher. You can see you can start to straighten that edge out a little bit. That one works pretty well usually. The loop tools relax does work quite a bit. You'll see. Starts to get it at least. You do too many at the same time, it doesn't quite work out. Another little idea for you though. So, all right, anyways, that's it for this video. I'll check you guys out in the next one. All right, take care.